For 2 long hours, the millionaire's son stared at the giant whiteboard, his small hands trembling as impossible equations mocked him. His father's heart broke watching him struggle. Everyone in the room thought it was hopeless. Until a quiet janitor walked in with her mop, paused, and whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Can I try this?" What happened next left the millionaire, his son, and the entire household in shock. Joshua Anderson, only 8 years old, stood on his tiptoes before the giant whiteboard in his father's private study. The whiteboard stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, crowded with lines of advanced mathematical equations that most graduate students would have struggled to comprehend. The boy's small frame trembled, his thin arms moving restlessly, hands flapping faster and faster in that nervous rhythm he always fell into when overwhelmed. His dark eyes remained fixed on the impossible symbols, but their shine had dulled, clouded by frustration. Behind him, Paul Anderson, an investment consultant known for his calm demeanor, watched with a mixture of pride and worry. He had been kneeling beside his son for the better part of 2 hours, trying to soothe him. "Josh," Paul said gently, reaching out to place a hand on the boy's shoulder, "you've worked hard enough for today. We can stop here, son." There's no shame in taking a break, but the boy didn't stop. His hands flapped harder, his breath quickened. Numbers danced chaotically in his mind, demanding order, refusing to line up neatly the way he wanted them to. To him, the whiteboard wasn't just scribbles of algebra. It was a puzzle he needed to solve. A song stuck inside his head. From across the room, Angela Crisp leaned against the paneled wall, dressed in her usual tailored suit. She had been in Paul's life for years, his business partner and trusted colleague, though her sharp eyes rarely softened. Tonight, they glittered with irritation. She tapped one manicured finger against her elbow and said flatly, "Paul, maybe it's time to accept the obvious. Math isn't for everyone. Pushing him like this, it's cruel." Her tone carried the faintest trace of contempt. For months, she had tried to get close to Joshua, stepping into the role left vacant since his mother's passing. Yet no matter how many patient games she suggested or how many quiet evenings she spent nearby, the boy never opened to her. He barely looked at her, let alone smiled. And now, watching him spiral into visible distress, she seemed less sympathetic and more impatient. Joshua squeezed his fists, his small body trembling with frustration. Tears pooled at the corners of his eyes. He wanted to understand. He wanted the stars in his head to fall into neat constellations on the board. But they wouldn't, and his failure was suffocating. At that moment, the quiet squeak of wheels on tile interrupted the tension. Alice Carter, the evening janitor, appeared in the doorway with her mop bucket. Her uniform was plain, her sneakers scuffed from long shifts across the building. She paused mid-step, sensing the heavy atmosphere. Her gaze drifted instinctively toward the whiteboard. Something flickered in her expression. The equation seemed to call to her, not with confusion, but with clarity. She tilted her head slightly, as though listening to music only she could hear. The mop handle slipped a little in her grasp. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice hesitant, but steady. "I didn't mean to intrude, but would it be all right if I tried?" Angela let out a sharp, derisive laugh, her voice cutting through the room like glass. "You're kidding. A janitor solving a math Olympiad problem?" "Paul, be serious." Paul hesitated. His instinct was to dismiss the offer, yet something in Alice's eyes gave him pause. It wasn't arrogance nor naivety. It was certainty. A quiet certainty that made him curious. Slowly, he took the marker from his son's trembling hand and held it out to her. Alice stepped forward. She stood before the board, as if meeting an old friend. Her movements were fluid, almost like choreography. Numbers and symbols spilled from her marker in a rhythm that was both precise and graceful, as though she were dancing with the equations. Less than a minute passed. The board filled with clean, confident lines leading to a flawless solution. Behind her, Joshua's restless flapping stopped. His small body stilled completely. For the first time in months, he looked up at another person with clear eyes. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward, reaching out to touch Alice's hand. His voice was small, trembling but alive. You see the numbers like I do?" Paul's breath caught. His throat tightened as his eyes filled with tears. He had waited so long to see his son truly connect. Alice knelt, bringing herself to Joshua's level. Her smile was warm, steady. "Yes," she whispered. "They shine in my head, just like they shine in yours." The boy's lips curved into a rare, fragile smile. Like little stars, for Paul, it was a miracle. For Angela, it was a wound. Her face twisted, her carefully guarded composure cracking. She had tried for months to win a piece of the boy's trust and failed. And here was this janitor, this outsider, who had done in minutes what she never could. Alice gently squeezed Joshua's hand. "My mom always told me," she said softly, "if you know something that can help someone, you have to share it. Always." Angela pushed herself off the wall, masking her fury behind a brittle smile. She stepped closer, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How touching," she said. "But don't mistake this for more than it is, dear. Know your place." The next morning, the Anderson household carried a strange tension in the air. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows of their suburban Virginia home, glinting off polished hardwood floors and modern furniture. But the warmth did little to soften the unease that lingered from the night before. Joshua sat at the kitchen table, his small body swaying back and forth in rhythm, a familiar self-soothing motion. His cereal bowl sat untouched, milk slowly turning warm. His eyes were distant, locked not on the food but on a pad of paper in front of him, where numbers and half-formed equations filled the page. Paul Anderson leaned against the counter, holding a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. His gaze rested on his son, concern written deeply across his face. The image of Joshua reaching out to Alice, the janitor, still haunted him. It wasn't just that she had solved the problem. It was the way his son had lit up, how the boy's restless energy had melted into stillness, replaced by a fragile, genuine smile. Paul had lived through months of silence, months where nothing seemed to reach Joshua. And then, in less than an hour, Alice had bridged that void. Angela Crisp appeared in the kitchen doorway, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She carried herself with the polished grace of someone accustomed to commanding respect. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her blouse immaculate. But beneath the surface, her jaw was tight, her eyes sharp. "You're still thinking about last night," she said. More an accusation than a question. Paul sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You saw what happened, Angela." He connected with her. For the first time in months. Angela walked further in, pouring herself a glass of water. "Paul, let's be realistic. She's a janitor. A woman who mops floors and empties trash cans. You can't put your son's development in the hands of someone like that. Someone like that." Paul repeated quietly, his tone edged with disapproval. Angela set the glass down a little too firmly on the counter. "Yes, someone without training. Without education. You can't gamble with Joshua's stability. Children on the spectrum need routine, structure, trained professionals, not flukes." Paul opened his mouth to respond, but Joshua's voice cut in, soft yet clear, startling them both. "Is Alice coming today?" The boy hadn't spoken at breakfast in weeks. Paul's heart clenched. He crouched beside him. "Do you want her to come back, Josh?" Joshua nodded, his eyes finally meeting his father's for the briefest moment. "She sees the stars too." Paul swallowed hard, emotion tightening his chest. He brushed his son's hair gently. "I'll see what I can do." Angela turned away, her expression tightening further. That tiny sentence from Joshua had pierced her more deeply than she wanted to admit. She had spent countless hours trying to reach him, sitting beside him during meltdowns, reading stories he never responded to, buying toys he ignored. And yet, one janitor with kind eyes and quick hands had managed in a single evening to draw him out. Later that afternoon, when Alice arrived for her cleaning shift at the office building, she was surprised to find Paul waiting near the lobby. He looked out of place there, tall and dressed sharply in his tailored suit among the employees heading out for the day. "Mr. Anderson?" Alice's voice was cautious, unsure why he was there. "Paul," he corrected gently. "Please call me Paul." He took a hesitant step closer. "Listen, about last night. I don't even know how to begin thanking you." Alice flushed, suddenly aware of the mop bucket she was still pushing. "There's nothing to thank me for. I just saw what he couldn't see." "It's more than that," Paul said, his voice low and earnest. "Joshua hasn't looked anyone in the eye since his mother died. He hasn't smiled in months. But with you," his words faltered, overwhelmed. "He came alive again." Alice shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at her worn sneakers. "I didn't do anything special. Numbers, they just make sense to me. They always have ever since." She stopped, her expression darkening as if remembering something painful. Paul noticed but didn't press. "I was hoping." He hesitated, searching her face. "Would you consider working with Joshua? As a tutor, officially. I'd pay you, of course. Whatever you need." Alice's eyes widened. She took a step back. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because." She looked down, twisting her hands. "I clean offices at night. I stock shelves at a store in the morning. I help at a diner on weekends. I barely make enough to cover rent and my mom's hospital bills. I don't have qualifications. I never even got to finish college." Paul's chest ached at the quiet shame in her voice. "Alice, I'm not asking for a degree. I'm asking for the connection I saw last night. My son needs you." Alice's throat tightened. Her mother's frail face came to her mind hooked to machines, whispering those words she had repeated since childhood. "If you know something that can help, you must help." She blinked back sudden tears. I'll think about it." From the far corner of the lobby, Angela watched, her eyes narrowing. She hadn't planned to stay late, but something had told her to linger. And now she saw Paul, her Paul, the man she had quietly loved for years, standing close to this janitor, his expression filled with gratitude and warmth she hadn't seen from him in so long. Angela's nails dug into her palm as she turned away. If this woman thought she could simply step into their lives because of a few equations, she had another thing coming. That night, as Alice returned to her tiny apartment on the edge of town, she found her mother, Margaret, dozing in the worn recliner. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic from the hospital visits. Alice knelt beside her, smoothing a blanket over her frail body. Margaret stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "You're home late," she whispered weakly. Alice smiled softly. "Yeah, Mom, just a long day." Margaret's gaze sharpened, even in her fragility. "Something's on your mind." "I can see it." Alice hesitated, then confessed. "There's this boy, he's different. Like me. And when he looked at me, it was like we were speaking the same language." Margaret's tired hand reached for hers. "Then don't be afraid, Alice. You've always hidden your light. Maybe it's time to let it shine for someone who needs it." Alice bowed her head, tears spilling silently. In her heart, she already knew she couldn't walk away from Joshua. He was like a reflection of herself as a child, isolated, misunderstood, but with stars in his mind that no one else could see. Far across town, in her luxury apartment, Angela poured herself a glass of wine and stared out at the city lights. Her reflection glared back at her in the window, her jaw tight with determination. "Enjoy your little moment, Alice," she murmured. "Because it won't last." Would you like me to continue the next part as Alice officially begins working with Joshua, showing his progress and Angela slowly starting her quiet sabotage? The Anderson estate looked brighter the following week, though no one could quite say why. Perhaps it was the way Joshua had begun humming softly in the mornings, or how his once empty eyes now carried a faint spark of anticipation. For months, silence had filled the halls of that house. But now, small as it was, there was a shift. Alice Carter had agreed, hesitantly, to return. Not as a janitor, but as Joshua's tutor. Paul had insisted on paying her properly, assuring her that what she offered was more valuable than any degree. And so, each afternoon after school, Alice arrived in her plain clothes and scuffed sneakers, carrying little more than a notebook, a few pencils, and a quiet determination that Joshua would be waiting by the front window. The moment her car pulled into the driveway, an old beat-up sedan that coughed like it might quit at any moment, he would rush to the door. "T.I. Alice," he'd shout, adopting the affectionate nickname he had chosen himself. His flapping hands would still when she appeared, his entire body softening into calm. Paul watched all of this with wonder. He hadn't seen his son so alive since his late wife, Agatha, had passed away. To him, every small change was a miracle. Joshua was speaking more, laughing at small jokes, even cracking his own, though they were always math jokes, which only Alice seemed to understand. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the three of them sat together in the study. Alice had drawn a simple circle on the board. "See this, Josh?" she asked gently. "This isn't just a shape. It's a whole world. Every circle holds infinite points, infinite possibilities. Kind of like the stars you see in your head." Joshua tilted his head, staring. His lips twitched into the smallest of smiles. "Like infinite stars?" Alice nodded. "Exactly." Paul leaned back in his chair, his chest swelling with pride. His son's voice, his smile, it was like a gift he thought he'd lost forever. But not everyone in that house welcomed the change. Angela Crisp, always present, always watching, had begun to simmer. She walked into the study carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you could use a break," she said, her tone carefully neutral. She handed one cup to Paul, then turned toward Alice. "Here, let me but." As she passed, her heel caught against the rug. The mug tipped. Dark, hot coffee spilled down onto Alice's worn handbag. "Oh no!" Angela exclaimed, feigning clumsiness. "How careless of me." Alice scrambled to open the bag, her face paling as she pulled out soggy bus passes, her work ID, and a stack of documents, most of them ruined. The only way she managed to get from one job to another was through those bus passes. Without them, she'd have to walk or beg rides. "It's okay," Alice muttered, trying to hide her distress. "Accidents happen." Paul immediately stood, his brow furrowed. "Alice, are you all right? Do you need new passes?" "I can cover it." Angela stepped in quickly, her voice sharp. "No need to overreact, Paul. I'm sure she's used to inconveniences like this. People like her always find a way, don't they?" Alice froze, hurt flashing across her face, but she forced a small smile. "I'll manage." She dabbed at her documents with a napkin, her hands trembling. That night, back in her small apartment, Alice sat at the tiny kitchen table, carefully laying out each ruined paper. Her mother, Margaret, shuffled out of the bedroom, leaning heavily on her walker. "What happened, sweetheart?" Alice shook her head, blinking away tears. "Nothing, Mom, just..." Spilled coffee. Margaret reached for her hand. "Don't let people treat you small. Alice, you shine brighter than you know." Alice smiled faintly, but her heart ached. She could already feel the weight of Angela's hostility. The next few days proved her fears true. Strange things began happening at the office. One afternoon, Alice arrived to find her schedule mysteriously changed, her tutoring session canceled without warning. Another day, whispers followed her through the hallways. She caught fragments of conversations between secretaries. "She's taking advantage of the boss's son," one whispered. "Trying to marry her way into money." "No doubt," another replied. Alice kept her head down, though her chest burned with humiliation. Every insult echoed in her mind on the long bus rides home. But when she entered the study each evening and saw Joshua's eager eyes, she reminded herself why she endured it. One evening, as she sat with him at the board, Joshua looked up suddenly. "Tie Alice, why do people look at you funny?" The innocence of the question broke her. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Finally, she whispered, "Because sometimes people don't understand us, Josh. They see only what they want to see. But that doesn't make us less." Joshua nodded slowly. "Like when kids at school say I'm weird. But I'm not weird. I'm just me." Alice's throat tightened. She brushed his hair gently. "Exactly, Josh. And you're perfect the way you are." From the doorway, Paul had been listening. His eyes glistened as he watched the two of them, realizing that Alice was teaching his son more than math. She was giving him courage. Angela appeared moments later, her smile tight, her voice honeyed. "What a sweet scene," she murmured. But her eyes, sharp as knives, landed on Alice. She had seen enough to know that this woman was becoming a threat, not just to her position in Joshua's life, but to her hold on Paul. Later that night, in her sleek apartment overlooking the city, Angela picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "I need a favor," she said, her voice cold. "A background check. Her name's Alice Carter. I want everything, where she lives, her debts, her family. Leave nothing out." The man on the other end hesitated. "That'll cost you, Angela. 5,000 at least." "Fine," she snapped. "I want the file on my desk tomorrow morning." She ended the call and stared out at the glittering skyline, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Her lips curved into a smile, thin and ruthless. "If she thinks she belongs here," Angela whispered to herself, "she's about to learn otherwise." Meanwhile, across town, Alice sat by her mother's bedside in the dim light of their apartment. Margaret's breathing was shallow, her skin pale. "Don't give up, Mom," Alice whispered, clutching her hand. "I'll find a way. I promise." Tears slid down her face. Little did she know that forces already conspired against her. Forces determined to rip away the fragile bond she had built with Joshua, and perhaps destroy the one chance she had to change both of their lives forever. The following morning dawned with a deceptive calm. The city stirred as usual. Commuters filled buses, cafes bustled with chatter, and the Anderson estate gleamed like any other day. But inside Angela Crisp's penthouse apartment, a storm was brewing. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock echoed through her front door. Angela, dressed immaculately in a navy blazer and silk blouse, answered to find a man in a gray suit, carrying a thick envelope. He said nothing, only handed it to her with a nod before disappearing down the hall. Angela locked the door behind her, set the envelope on the marble counter, and slid it open with deliberate care. Inside lay a stack of papers, photographs, and printouts. She spread them across the counter like a general examining battle plans. Her eyes scanned the first page. Alice Carter, age 27, resides in East Arlington, low-income housing unit. Works 3 jobs: janitorial staff at Crestfield Towers, grocery clerk at Green Mart, and waitress at Mary's Diner. Mother, Margaret Carter, hospitalized for 3 months. Outstanding medical debt, $50,000. Angela's lips curled into a smile. "Perfect," she murmured. She turned the pages, her eyes lighting with every detail. A photograph showed Alice stepping off a late-night bus, exhaustion etched into her features. Another showed her in her diner uniform, balancing trays with a weary grace. Angela's smile widened as she read the note. "Doctors predict patient. Margaret Carter has less than 1 week without immediate surgery." She closed the folder with a snap, poured herself a glass of wine, though it was barely past breakfast, and raised it in mock salute. "So that's your weakness, little janitor. Not numbers, family." That evening, Alice arrived at the Anderson home for her tutoring session. Joshua was already waiting by the door, bouncing with anticipation. The moment she stepped in, his hands stopped flapping, his whole body relaxing like a flower opening to sunlight. "T.I. Alice," he cried, running to her. She knelt to hug him, her tired face softening into a smile. Paul emerged from the study, loosening his tie. "Alice," he greeted warmly. "Good to see you. Josh has been waiting all day." Alice ducked her head shyly. "I'm glad to be here." Angela appeared moments later, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. Her smile was polite, but her eyes gleamed with a secret knowledge. "Alice," she said sweetly, "how's your mother?" Alice froze, startled by the question. She's stable. The doctors say she needs surgery soon." Angela tilted her head, her tone sympathetic but her smile too sharp. "That must be so difficult. Medical bills are terrible things. I do hope you manage." Alice nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze, and hurried Joshua into the study. Paul watched the exchange with unease, but said nothing. Inside the study, Joshua pressed close to Alice as she drew geometric shapes on the board. His laughter filled the room, the sound so rare and precious that Paul felt tears threaten at the corners of his eyes. Angela lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed. The sight of them, Alice kneeling beside Joshua, gently guiding his hand as he traced a triangle, made her chest burn with fury. That night, Angela put her plan into motion. She drove to the neighborhood where Alice lived. The streets were narrow, the houses run down. She parked near a corner bakery and slipped inside, pretending to browse. Two women stood near the counter, gossiping in low voices. "Poor Alice," one said. "She works herself half to death and still can't save enough. If she doesn't get the money soon, her mom won't make it." $50,000, the other sighed. "Who can ever get that kind of money? It's hopeless." Angela's smile was icy as she paid for a loaf of bread she didn't want and returned to her car. She had all the information she needed. The next evening, Alice sat by her mother's hospital bed, clutching her hand. Margaret's breathing was shallow, her face pale against the pillows. Dr. Stevens, the attending physician, entered with a grim expression. "Alice," he said gently, "your mother's condition has worsened. We have to operate by the end of the week. If we don't—" His voice trailed off. Alice's heart clenched. "I've raised $10,000 so far. I'll find the rest, I promise." The doctor shook his head. "We don't have time." "I'm sorry." When Alice left the hospital that night, her steps dragged, her body heavy with despair. She sat on a bench outside, her hands trembling. That's when she heard a familiar voice. "Alice?" What a coincidence. She looked up to see Angela approaching, her designer heels clicking against the pavement. She wore a coat that probably cost more than Alice earned in a month. "What are you doing here?" Alice asked warily. Angela's expression was one of feigned concern. She sat beside her, lowering her voice. "I heard about your mother. It must be unbearable." Alice's throat tightened. "She doesn't have much time. I need the money, but—" Her voice cracked. Angela leaned closer. "I could help. I have $50,000 sitting in my account." Alice's head snapped up, her eyes wide. You'd lend me that much?" Angela's smile was slow, deliberate. "Of course. But like any loan, there would be conditions." Alice's stomach sank. "What conditions?" Angela's eyes glittered. "You'll stop tutoring Joshua. Stop seeing Paul. Walk away for good." Alice recoiled as if struck. "You want me to abandon Josh?" Angela's tone was calm, reasonable, almost soothing. "Alice, be realistic. You're a janitor. He's a millionaire's son. That world isn't meant for you. Save your mother. Leave them behind. It's the only choice that makes sense." Tears blurred Alice's vision. I can't. He needs me. He understands me." Angela's voice hardened. "Then explain why you refused Paul's help. Why you're sitting here alone, desperate. Face it, you don't belong in his world." Alice's resolve crumbled. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I need to think. Angela placed a hand on her shoulder, her smile cold. You have 2 days, Alice. 2 days to decide whether your mother lives or dies. That night, Alice returned to her apartment like a ghost, moving without awareness. She sat at the table, staring at the crumpled bus passes and ruined documents from Angela's accident. Her mind spun with impossible choices. Across town, Angela poured herself another glass of wine, her reflection smirking back from the window. Checkmate, she whispered. But in the Anderson home, Joshua lay awake, clutching a crumpled drawing in his hand. 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one with long hair. In his quiet, childlike way, he knew something was wrong. He whispered into the darkness, "Where are you, Alice?" And though no one heard, the words hung heavy in the air, like a promise that the storm was only just beginning. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Alice Carter sat in a hard plastic chair outside her mother's room, her hands clasped so tightly they turned white. Inside, Margaret lay hooked up to machines, her breaths shallow, her once strong hands limp against the sheets. Dr. Stevens appeared, his expression grim. He crouched so his eyes met Alice's. "We're out of time. If your mother doesn't have the surgery within the next 48 hours, the damage will be irreversible." "I'm sorry." Alice's vision blurred with tears. "But I only have 10,000. I've been working every hour I can." "I understand," the doctor interrupted gently, "but this isn't negotiable. The surgery costs 50. Without it, she won't survive." When he walked away, Alice sat motionless. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. She could already hear Angela's voice echoing in her head. 2 days. Alice, decide. That night, Alice wandered the streets like a ghost. Rain began to fall, soaking her thin jacket. She found herself in a small park across from the hospital, sitting on a bench with her head in her hands. "Alice," a smooth voice called. She looked up to see Angela Crisp, holding a sleek black umbrella, her silhouette framed by the streetlights. She approached slowly, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. "What are you doing here?" Alice's voice was hoarse. Angela's face was the picture of sympathy, but her eyes glittered with triumph. "I could ask you the same. But I already know. Your mother doesn't have much time, does she?" Alice's lips trembled. "Please, don't." Angela sat beside her, placing the umbrella so it covered them both. "Alice, I can transfer $50,000 tonight. All it takes is one word from you." Alice's chest heaved. "And I walk away from Joshua." Angela nodded calmly, as though they were discussing a business deal. "Yes, no more tutoring. No more visits. You leave Paul's house and never look back. Your mother lives or..." She let the unspoken threat hang heavy in the air. Alice's tears mixed with the rain. "He needs me. I can't just disappear from his life." Angela's smile was thin. "Be realistic. He's a millionaire's son. You're a janitor with nothing but debt. Do you want your mother to die because you're clinging to a fantasy?" Alice's breath caught, her entire body trembling. For a long time she said nothing, torn between the boy who saw the stars like she did and the woman who had raised her, who had sacrificed everything. Finally she whispered, "Give me until morning." Angela placed a manicured hand on her shoulder. "Of course. But remember, time is running out." The next day, Alice dragged herself to the Anderson home for what she knew might be her last session with Joshua. He greeted her at the door with his usual burst of joy. "Hi, Alice. I knew you'd come." Her throat closed. She knelt to hug him, holding him longer than usual. "Of course I came, sweetheart." In the study, Joshua scribbled equations on the whiteboard while Alice guided him. He laughed when she compared a circle to a pizza. For a fleeting hour, she let herself pretend nothing had changed. But when Joshua turned and asked innocently, "You'll be here tomorrow, right?" Alice's heart shattered. She forced a smile. "We'll see, Josh. We'll see." From the doorway, Paul had been watching. He noticed the forced brightness in her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly. After the session, when Joshua ran off to fetch a drawing he'd made, Paul approached her. "Alice, are you all right? You seem worried." Alice looked down at her hands. She wanted to tell him everything, that Angela had cornered her, that her mother's life was dangling by a thread, that she was being blackmailed into leaving. But fear held her back. Would he believe her? Or would he believe Angela, his longtime partner? "It's just my mother," Alice whispered. "She needs surgery soon. I don't know how to get the money." Paul's expression softened with sympathy. "Then let me help. I can cover it. Consider it an advance on the tutoring. No strings attached." Alice shook her head fiercely. "No, I can't. People already whisper that I'm taking advantage. I won't give them more reason." Paul stepped closer. "Alice, listen to me. You're saving my son. You're giving him life again. Let me help save yours." Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to step back. "I can't. Please, don't ask me again." Paul studied her face, torn between respect and frustration. Before he could press further, Angela entered, holding a folder. "Everything okay here?" she asked smoothly, her eyes darting between them. Alice excused herself quickly, murmuring something about catching the last bus. She fled the house, leaving Paul staring after her, his heart heavy with worry. That night, the hospital called. Alice rushed to find her mother unconscious, machines beeping frantically. Dr. Stevens met her in the hallway, his face grave. "She won't last another day without the surgery." Alice staggered back, the walls closing in. She thought of Joshua, of his smile, of the stars in his head that only she could see. Then she thought of her mother, fading away before her eyes. The choice ripped her apart. At 2 a.m., sitting on the same park bench in the rain, she dialed Angela's number with shaking fingers. Angela answered immediately. "Well?" Alice's voice broke. "I'll do it. I'll take the money. But it's a loan. I'll pay it back every cent." Angela's smile could be heard through the phone. "Of course, dear. I'll transfer it now. But you remember our agreement, no more tutoring, no more Andersons, ever." Alice closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I remember." Within an hour, the money hit her account. By morning, she was signing the papers for her mother's surgery. The relief was overwhelming. Her mother would live, but it came at the cost of the one bond that had given her hope. 3 days later, Margaret's surgery was declared a success. Alice wept at her bedside, holding her mother's hand as she whispered, "You're safe now. Mom, you're safe." But across town, in the Anderson home, Joshua was unraveling. He sat in the corner of the study, rocking back and forth, refusing food. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at Paul, wouldn't touch his toys. The only words he muttered, scrawled shakily on the whiteboard in uneven letters, were, "Where is T.I. Alice?" Paul's chest tightened every time he saw it. He tried everything, reading Joshua's favorite stories, cooking his favorite meals, but nothing worked. The boy was slipping further and further away. Angela, standing behind him, placed a hand on his arm. "You see? This is what happens when you let outsiders interfere." She left Paul. She never belonged here. But Paul wasn't convinced. Something in his gut told him Alice hadn't left by choice. He looked at his son, then at Angela, and a seed of doubt began to grow. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Alice sat at her kitchen table, head bowed in her hands. Her mother slept peacefully in the next room, alive because of her sacrifice. But the silence of the apartment was deafening. She could almost hear Joshua's voice, asking, "You see the stars too?" And she wept, knowing she had saved one life by breaking another. The Anderson home, once filled with the soft laughter that Alice had brought back, had fallen eerily silent. Days had passed since she stopped coming, and the absence was like a heavy fog pressing down on every room. Joshua no longer waited by the window. He no longer asked what time Alice would arrive. Instead, he retreated inward, his body rocking back and forth for hours at a time. He scribbled on the whiteboard alone, endless lines of half-finished equations, none of them making sense. And on the bottom corner of the board, in crooked, childlike letters, he wrote the same question again and again. Where is Alice? Paul Anderson stood in the doorway one evening, watching his son trace those words with shaking hands. His heart twisted. Josh, buddy, come eat something. I brought your favorite yogurt. The boy didn't turn. His lips moved soundlessly, repeating the same phrase under his breath. Where is she? Where is she? Paul stepped into the room, kneeling beside him. I don't know why she left, Josh, but I promise we'll find answers. Joshua finally turned, his dark eyes clouded with something Paul had never seen before. Betrayal. Did you make her go away, Dad? The question hit like a blade. Paul swallowed hard, unable to answer. He reached out, but Joshua flinched away. Clutching the marker like a weapon. From behind, Angela Crisp entered the study, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She folded her arms, her voice sweet but firm. Paul, you can't let him obsess like this. Alice abandoned him. The sooner he accepts that, the better. Paul spun toward her, his eyes sharp. Abandoned him? You saw how she cared for him. People don't fake that kind of connection. Angela raised a brow, feigning innocence. Then explain why she vanished without a word. Why she refused your help and disappeared the moment money became an issue. Paul clenched his fists. You seem awfully sure about her motives, Angela. For a flicker of a moment, her smile faltered. But she quickly recovered. I'm being practical, Paul. Your son needs stability, not illusions. That night, Paul couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, replaying every moment he had witnessed between Alice and Joshua, the gentle way she guided his hand on the board, the soft laughter they shared, the rare smile on his son's face. None of it had felt like a lie. Then he remembered something else, the way Alice's eyes had trembled when she spoke about her mother. The exhaustion in her face. The refusal to accept his financial help, as if terrified of being seen as opportunistic. A seed of suspicion took root. Something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Alice sat in the dim glow of her apartment kitchen, her head resting on her folded arms. The silence was unbearable. Her mother's surgery had been a success. Margaret now slept peacefully in the bedroom, but the victory felt hollow. Alice replayed Joshua's voice in her head, the way he had whispered, "You see the stars too?" She had felt, for the first time in her life, like she wasn't alone. And now she had torn that bond apart with her own hands. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a neighbor, Mrs. Patel, holding a casserole dish. "We heard about your mother's surgery. Thank God she pulled through." But Alice, her expression turned curious. "We also heard you suddenly came up with the money. $50,000, just like that. Where did it come from?" Alice's cheeks burned. "A loan," she muttered quickly. "I'll pay it back." The older woman gave her a long, skeptical look, but said nothing more. After she left, Alice collapsed into a chair, pressing her hands against her face. Already the whispers had begun. Already the story was spreading. Back in the Anderson offices, Angela was working her next move. She stood before a small group of employees in the conference room, her voice carrying a tone of careful authority. "I'm only saying we should be cautious," she announced. This woman came out of nowhere. A janitor, suddenly playing tutor to Paul's son. Does anyone here know her credentials? Her background? "We have to protect Joshua," several staff members murmured in agreement. One secretary whispered, "I heard she used the boy to get close to Paul. Typical poor girl trying to trap a rich man." Angela smiled faintly, satisfied, and let the rumor take root. Later that day, she visited Paul in his office. He sat at his desk, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. She placed a folder on his desk. "What's this?" he asked wearily. "Proof," she replied softly. Inside were copies of the loan papers Alice had signed, alongside a small USB stick. "I thought you should see for yourself," Angela continued. Paul hesitated, then plugged the USB into his computer. An audio file played. Alice's tired voice filled the room. "Yes, I took the 50,000. And I'll stop working with the Andersons." Paul's face drained of color. "My God." Angela touched his arm gently. "I warned you, Paul. She wasn't what she seemed." But even as he listened, something gnawed at him. The recording was clipped, too neat, as though pieces had been cut away. And the Alice he had come to know, the Alice who had sat at his son's side, patient and kind, did not match the woman in that file. Angela leaned closer. "It's time to let her go. For Joshua's sake. For yours." Paul closed the folder slowly. "Maybe you're right," he murmured. But deep in his chest, doubt continued to smolder. That night, Joshua refused dinner again. He sat in the corner of his room, rocking, whispering to himself. When Paul entered quietly, the boy scrawled something new on the wall-sized whiteboard. 3 words, jagged and uneven. "Daddy hurt Alice?" Paul's chest constricted. He crouched beside his son. "No, Josh, I didn't hurt her. At least, I didn't mean to." Joshua turned his face, tears streaking down his cheeks. "She didn't leave. Someone made her." Paul froze, staring at his son in shock. The certainty in the boy's voice, the raw conviction, it shook him. "Josh," he whispered, "why do you say that?" The boy's eyes flickered. "Because she promised. She said stars don't go away." Paul gathered his son into his arms, holding him tightly as he wept silently. In that moment, Paul made a vow he would uncover the truth. Whatever it took. Angela watched from the hallway, her face pale, her nails digging into her palms. For the first time, she felt a ripple of fear, because she could see it in Paul's eyes. He was starting to suspect. The following days passed in a haze of tension, each hour pressing down heavier on Paul Anderson. The once proud, confident businessman found himself pacing his office late into the night, staring at documents without absorbing a single word, replaying every moment he'd witnessed between Alice and his son. Something wasn't adding up. The audio clip Angela had given him echoed in his mind. Alice's voice, flat, tired. "Yes, I took the 50,000. And I'll stop working with the Andersons." The words seemed damning. And yet, when Paul closed his eyes, he remembered the way Alice had looked at Joshua, gentle, patient, filled with genuine care. Could someone capable of that kind of love really sell them out so coldly? At home, things were worse. Joshua was unraveling before his eyes. His eating habits deteriorated. He refused his favorite yogurt, ignored the puzzles he once enjoyed, and spoke less and less each day. He wrote on the whiteboard constantly, phrases that broke Paul's heart. "Where is T.I. Alice? Daddy made her leave? Did I do something wrong?" One night, Paul sat on the edge of Joshua's bed. The boy lay curled under his blanket, his small body rocking in the dark. "Josh," Paul whispered, brushing his hair back. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why you're upset?" Joshua's eyes glistened. "You let her go." The words sliced deeper than any accusation Angela had ever made. The next morning, Paul made a decision. He went to the office hours before anyone else, the building quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. He called an IT specialist, David, a trusted employee he'd known for years. "David, I need a favor," Paul said, his voice low. "Confidential." David raised an eyebrow. Of course, sir. What is it? Paul handed him the USB stick Angela had provided. I need you to check this file. I want to know if it's been tampered with. Edited, cut, anything. David nodded, sliding the stick into his laptop. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as he ran diagnostics. After a tense few minutes, he looked up. This file's been spliced, David confirmed. There are obvious jumps in the waveform, whole sections missing. Whoever edited this wanted to make someone sound guilty. Paul's stomach sank, fury rising in his chest. Can you recover the original? David adjusted his glasses. Give me a day. Paul left the office with his jaw tight, his fists clenched. His doubts were becoming certainties. Angela had given him a doctored recording, which meant Alice had been telling the truth all along. That evening, while Angela was in the conference room charming investors, Paul slipped quietly into her private office. It was immaculate, every folder labeled, every file neatly stacked. But Paul knew her too well. Angela was careful, but she was also proud, and pride often left traces. He checked her desk drawers, her filing cabinets, nothing. Then his eyes fell on the computer monitor, the screensaver slowly pulsing. He sat in her chair, typed in a few guesses for her password. On the fourth try, her late father's birthday, it opened. Paul's breath caught. There, in a folder buried beneath layers of innocuous documents, was a file labeled Report, Alice Carter. He clicked. The screen filled with photos. Alice leaving the hospital. Alice mopping the hallway. Alice carrying groceries late at night. Pages of financial records, hospital bills, even transcripts of her mother's medical condition. And at the very bottom, an email thread between Angela and a private investigator. Paul read with growing horror. Find out exactly how desperate she is. Her mother won't last a week without surgery. Good, that's leverage. His hand trembled as he scrolled further. Attached was a note. Alice agreed under pressure. Secured recording. Will edit for clarity. Paul slammed the laptop shut, his chest heaving. There was no doubt anymore. Angela had manipulated everything. Alice's desperation, her love for her mother, her fear of judgment. She had engineered the entire fall. That night, Paul drove across the city, following the faint memory of where Alice had once told him she lived. The neighborhood was dark, the houses small and tired, laundry hanging limply from porches. He parked in front of a narrow brick apartment building and climbed the stairs. To the third floor. He knocked. When the door opened, Alice stood there, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes ringed with shadows. She stiffened instantly at the sight of him. Paul, she said flatly. What are you doing here? I needed to see you, he answered, his voice rough. I know the truth now. About Angela. About the loan. About everything. Alice's body tensed. Too late. You didn't believe me when it mattered. Paul stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. Alice, I was wrong. I let her poison my mind. But I've seen the files, the photos, the messages. I know she blackmailed you. I know you only took that money to save your mother. Tears filled Elise's eyes, but she shook her head. That doesn't change what you did. You looked at me and believed I was nothing more than a liar trying to climb into your world. Paul's voice broke. Because I was blinded by my own pride. I judge you for being a janitor, not for the woman you are. I failed you. And I failed Joshua. At the mention of the boy's name, Alice's defenses cracked. How is he? She whispered. Paul's throat tightened. He's falling apart. He won't eat. He won't speak. All he does is write your name and ask where you are. Alice covered her mouth. Sobbing quietly. Paul reached out, his hand trembling. Please, Alice, come see him. He needs you. I need you. We can fix this together. For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Finally, Alice stepped back, her voice trembling. "I'll think about it. But Paul, don't make promises you can't keep." He nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. Back at the Anderson home, Angela paced her office like a trapped animal. Something in Paul's eyes had changed recently, sharper, colder. She sensed it, and she knew her carefully built facade was cracking. She poured herself another glass of wine, staring at her reflection in the window. "If he thinks he can turn this around, he's wrong," she muttered. But for the first time, her voice trembled. Because deep down, Angela Crisp knew the tide was shifting. And soon, all her lies would come crashing down. The storm finally broke. Not outside, the Virginia skies were clear. The summer air warm and heavy, but inside the Anderson empire, where trust and betrayal had been colliding for weeks, Paul Anderson had the proof. After long nights of doubt, endless pacing, and Joshua's haunting questions written over and over on the whiteboard, he now carried undeniable evidence. The IT team had restored the full audio, revealing Angela's voice manipulating the situation, clipping Alice's words to frame her. The secret folder on Angela's computer had contained everything: the investigators' reports, the financial details, the plan to corner Alice through her mother's illness. It was all there, cold, calculated, and cruel. Paul sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home. He replayed the full recording again, this time forcing himself to listen to every painful second. Angela's voice: "So it's confirmed. You took the 50,000 and you'll stop working with the Andersons." Alice's exhausted voice: "That's what we agreed. But let's make it clear. This is a loan. I'll pay it back every month if I have to, even if it takes years. I only agreed because my mother would die without the surgery. Don't twist this into something else." Angela's chilling reply: "Oh dear, of course not. It's for the best. Paul deserves someone from his own class." Paul's chest ached as he shut the laptop. He had doubted her. He had looked Alice in the eyes and believed the worst, while she had been sacrificing everything for her mother. And now his son was paying the price. That night, Paul went to Joshua's room. The boy sat on the floor in front of the whiteboard, his small frame rocking. His handwriting was jagged, frantic. "Where is T.I. Alice?" Over and over again until the board was crowded with the words. Paul knelt beside him, his voice breaking. "Josh, I found out the truth. T.I. Alice didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because someone forced her to." Joshua stopped rocking. His eyes flickered toward his father for the first time in days. "Angela?" he whispered. Paul swallowed hard. "Yes, son. Angela tricked us both. But I promise I'll fix this. I'll bring her back." Joshua's lip quivered. "Stars don't leave forever." Paul gathered him into his arms, holding him close. "Nobody. They don't, not the real ones." The next morning, the Anderson headquarters was buzzing with the usual activity. Employees moved briskly through the sleek hallways, unaware that the ground beneath them was about to shift. Angela Crisp stood in the center of the conference room, presenting quarterly figures to a group of executives. She was in her element, confident, polished, her voice steady. She commanded the room with the ease of someone who had spent years cultivating power. The glass doors opened. Paul entered, but he wasn't in his usual composed state. His presence was charged, his eyes sharp as blades. He carried a laptop under his arm. "Everyone out," Paul said curtly. The room fell silent. Executives exchanged uncertain glances before hurriedly gathering their papers and leaving. Angela, startled, forced a smile. "Paul, what's going on? We were just about to finalize." "Sit down." Paul cut her off. Angela blinked, her smile faltering. "Excuse me?" "Sit down." The steel in his voice left no room for argument. Slowly she lowered herself into a chair. Paul set the laptop on the table, opened the file, and pressed play. Angela's own voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. "Good. That's leverage. Then Alice's trembling reply. Desperate to make clear it was a loan, not a payoff. Then Angela again, dripping with venom. Paul needs someone from his own class. The recording ended. Silence pressed heavy. Angela's face drained of color. Paul, I can explain. He slammed his hand on the table. Explain what? That you blackmailed a desperate woman? That you used her dying mother as a weapon? That you manipulated me into destroying the one person who made my son smile again? Angela's composure cracked. I did it for you. She cried. For Joshua. You don't understand, Paul. I've loved you for years. I stood by you after Agatha died. I kept this company afloat while you drowned in grief. And then she walks in some janitor, and in weeks she takes everything I've been waiting for. Paul stared at her in disbelief. This isn't love, Angela. This is obsession. You didn't do this for me, or for Joshua. You did it because you couldn't stand to see me happy with someone else. Angela's voice shook, desperation seeping in. She doesn't belong in our world. She ruined you, Paul. She ruined the company. Can't you see that? Paul leaned forward, his voice low and cutting. The only one ruining anything here is you. By noon, Angela Crisp's access card was deactivated. Security escorted her out of the building while stunned employees whispered in the hallways. Some looked at her with pity, others with satisfaction. But Angela kept her chin high, her eyes burning with rage. As the glass doors closed behind her, she hissed under her breath, "This isn't over." That evening, Paul drove to Alice's neighborhood again. His heart pounded as he climbed the familiar stairs, each step echoing with his son's words, "Stars don't leave forever." He knocked softly on her door. Alice opened it cautiously, her expression guarded. She looked tired, her hair tied back hastily, shadows still under her eyes. When she saw him, her shoulders stiffened. "Paul, why are you here again?" He held out a small USB stick in his palm. "Because I was wrong. And I want to show you proof." Alice frowned, but stepped aside to let him in. They sat at her small kitchen table, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. Paul plugged the stick into his laptop and played the full recording. Alice listened in silence, her eyes widening as Angela's manipulation became clear. By the time it ended, tears were sliding down her cheeks. Paul's voice was low, filled with regret. "I doubted you. I let her turn me against you. And I hurt you. But I swear, Alice, I'll never make that mistake again." Alice's hands trembled in her lap. "Paul, do you have any idea what you did to Joshua, to me? He was the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't broken. And you took that away." Paul's eyes shone with guilt. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. Please, Alice, come back. For Joshua. He needs you." Her breath hitched. "And you?" His voice softened. "I need you too." For a long moment, she stared at him, torn between hurt and hope. Then a small sound broke the silence. The creak of the bedroom door. Margaret, frail but recovering, stood leaning on her walker. Her voice was weak but steady. "Alice, sometimes people make terrible mistakes. But if they come back with the truth in their hands, maybe it means they've learned." Alice's tears fell freely now. She covered her face, sobbing quietly. Paul reached across the table, hesitating, then gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. The next evening, Paul brought Alice back to the Anderson home. Joshua had been listless all day, refusing food, staring blankly at the whiteboard. But when the door opened and Alice stepped inside, his head snapped up. "T.I. Alice?" His voice was small, trembling. She knelt instantly, her arms open. "I'm here, Josh. I'm so sorry I was gone." He bolted across the room and threw himself into her arms, his entire body relaxing in relief. For the first time in days, he smiled through his tears. "I knew the stars wouldn't leave forever." Paul stood in the doorway, his eyes wet, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. For the first time in weeks, hope filled the house again. But outside, parked just down the street, Angela sat in her car, watching through the windshield. Her hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Through gritted teeth, she whispered, "Enjoy this while you can. Because I'm not finished." And in that moment, the storm that had seemed to break was only gathering strength again.